You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners, so let's be friends. I have found a couple of friends to talk about the F1 news with me, but it's not Sunday night, it's Saturday, the 13th of July, because England are playing in the Euros tomorrow, so it would have been very difficult for me to find a panel. But we are joined by the dregs of the Missed Apex panel, the three people who didn't have anything interesting to do on a Saturday night. So, of course, that's me, as I'm a 43-year-old dad. So, uncontroversially, I have no plans anyway. We're also joined by Matt Trumpets. Hello, Matt.
It's coming home to Mercedes.
Don't, because by the time most people are listening to this, we will know whether England won the Euros or not. And they are playing a very informed Spain. So let me just enjoy this moment of hope where maybe England won.
Okay, fair. But only the 17th or 18th time.
Okay, and we're also joined in the middle of a workday, it has to be said, by Brad Philpot. Hello, Brad.
Hey, Spanners. Yeah, I am working. As soon as I finish this, I'm off to do some more sim coaching, but it's lovely to join you guys in the shed and chat about Formula One.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to do is a kind of ripped from the headlines. You know, on like BBC or Sky, they have all the newspapers strewn around and they talk about all the articles. Well, that's what we're going to do today. So the article I'm referencing has been very hard to find, this first news story, and it is about Max Verstappen having having vision problems after the Silverstone 2021 crash. Now, it has been a little bit difficult to find this article for reasons I will go into, but I was reading it on racefans.net and they clicked to an article which made no mention of Verstappen talking about his vision problems. So to set the scene slightly, if you're new to Formula One, there was a controversial coming together at Copse in the Silverstone 2021 Grand Prix on lap one. Verstappen round the outside, giving Lewis Hamilton a good old squeeze. Lewis Hamilton refuses to yield, and they come together in the middle of the track. And it's the smallest of touches, but it is enough to send Max Verstappen hurtling into the barriers. And it was such a big impact. Like, it really was a big racing incident, big racing impact, that if you look at the crowd shots, and there's some mobile phone footage from within the stands, and when it initially happens and Verstappen's going off, you hear this cheer because it's the home crowd and the competitor has gone off the track. But as soon as he crunches into the barrier, there's like this hushed silence. It's like, yeah, oh my goodness. And at the time, you know, he walks out of the car, thank goodness. You know, modern F1, amazing safety, has a routine medical check, but for various reasons, like at Silverstone, it's not at the track, so he had to go to the hospital. He wasn't like admitted to hospital because there was any particular thing wrong with him, but he had to go to the hospital, and it's not nice for him sitting there while Lewis Hamilton is then celebrating. But it turns out that there was some more ramifications. So I'll read the article that has been widely quoted. So it's from Red Bull's own magazine called Red Bulletin. So Max was in an intense battle for the championship title against Lewis Hamilton, but that's not all. And this is quotation marks. Since my Silverstone crash, I've been struggling with visibility problems, especially on undulating courses or those with lots of advertising boards along the side of the track. In this race, I wasn't just battling Lewis, but also against blurry images. It continues. It was like driving a speedboat at 300 kilometers an hour. I've never told you this before, but for a few laps it was so bad that I seriously considered turning the car off. The only thing that helped was concentrating on my breathing while Lewis was breathing down my neck. An important victory that I desperately needed in the fight for the championship. So the first thing I want to say, guys, is, I mean, it's not surprising that Verstappen would have some kind of residual injury. And if that's the worst of it, it's still amazing that he was able to just walk away from that accident. But it is a little bit concerning that he would be driving on with vision problems. So Brad, how important, you're a race driver, how important is being able to see clearly for a race driver?
It's pretty important. Yeah, it's one of the most important things. So I'm just going to say this up front. I don't blame Max for carrying on if he did have these problems, and they are as severe as the article says, because you're in the fight for a championship and you have no idea whether you'll ever be in one again. So you would, as long as you felt you weren't imminently going to crash, and he didn't. He had some other incidents later in the season, but I think this is specifically referencing Kota in 2021, and he finished. He didn't have a problem, so he maybe did judge it correctly. But on the face of it, having vision problems as severe as he's describing, the medical officer certainly wouldn't want you to be racing. So I can understand why it sounds like he didn't tell anyone about it, even though you're definitely supposed to.
So one of the interesting things from us speculating that, hang on a minute, either he's been passed when he shouldn't have been passed fit to drive, or he's maybe not declared it. Because that's the thing. I'm assuming the teams or the drivers have to make a declaration to go, no, we're completely fit to drive.
Yeah, we've got other recent examples, though, of drivers who are injured or have an ongoing medical issue, like their appendix has just been removed and they've just been sewn back up. That's happened a couple of times recently. And they're past fit to drive regardless, because it's deemed that they're still healthy and fit enough. I don't think we've got any examples of people claiming that they actually can't see where they're going, though. So I think that's where this is slightly worse potentially, because that then could potentially cause a problem for your competitors or the spectators. You know, if something was to go wrong and you did misjudge something because you couldn't see, obviously that's a bigger deal.
Yeah, one of the things that interests me very much about this is it sounds like, although the article doesn't mention it, but sort of the implication to me is that he would have been, in fact, passing whatever vision checks they would normally give a driver. But it was only in these very specific circumstances that he noticed it. So first of all, I'm not going to blame him for going back out during the next race, because it's entirely likely he wouldn't have known it's an issue until maybe he got to qualifying.
If that's the specific scenario he's describing there, I'm also going to just point out that in various forms of pretty fast motorsport around the world, we intentionally drive with poor visibility, or certainly completely permitted to. So look at hypercars racing in the rain at night at Le Mans or other circuits around the world. It is absolutely inescapable that your vision is severely impaired. I've raced at night, not in cars as quick as that, but in pretty fast cars with rain and darkness, and I've really struggled to see what's coming next. And you have to just keep going regardless. That's with everybody else on track also struggling to see. So obviously that's with the caveat that Formula One is very, very fast. But yeah, even so, you don't have to have 100% perfect vision in motorsport all the time.
I think what he's describing here is it's like driving a speedboat at 300 kilometers an hour. I considered turning the car off. I was battling against blurry images. To me, that it seems to go beyond what the F1 race director would want a driver to be in the condition of. Obviously, we are looking at it from kind of sofa-bound HR, where you go, oh, that's awfully dangerous. But, you know, there's obviously a different line of danger. But these comments are problematic and lead to the sort of questions we're asking. And the proof of that is that I just couldn't find the original quote. So I was clicking from the racefans.net, and they're, you know, real journalists. Are, you know, it's a big boy website. And it was clicking to the red bullet with that article nowhere to be found, that quote nowhere to be found. And Meg Schuster has, from the Ringer F1, has very usefully sent me the link from the Wayback Machine, which I've never heard of. But basically, if you go back in time to the 11th, those comments are there. So they have deliberately decided to remove those comments as if, I don't know, as if that's going to help, as if that's going to hide it. But clearly Red Bull think it's an issue that they've printed Verstappen admitting to basically having a medical issue while driving.
Well, yeah, this is the marketing team not knowing the Formula One rules, more or less, is what I would guess. They think it's all glory and excitement, but not realizing their regulatory implications to admitting that in print.
Yeah, so I don't know. I doubt anything's going to come from that because they'll just say, it's out of context. I didn't quite mean it like that. I'm sure, that's the way it goes. I found that element of it amusing, but also it does show to a hardened racer doing everything he can to secure that title, Brad, because, he's obviously driving in less than ideal circumstances. That circuit in America race, that was a good race as well. He was having to hold off Hamilton at the end, just 5 more laps and Hamilton would have had him. But it's depending how long he had those issues for, that's another, I think, important part of the story.
I think the thing here is drivers can often be competing in less than perfect medical situations. And as long as they don't outwardly show it or tell anyone about it, they're going to potentially get away with it or not have any additional problems. This sounds like a relatively big deal. It sounds like it's not particularly safe, but who said anything about being safe?
How am I supposed to make that safe? He was built for combat.
Well, I just think, first of all, it makes me think very much of the situation we had in Qatar, where we had drivers literally stop racing because they felt bad. We had other drivers being sick in their helmets. And it was clearly every driver was having to make a choice on that track as to whether or not they could safely compete. And so in the absence of a problem so obvious it presents itself when you're static, i.e. here's a vision test. Well, I can't even read the 25. I can't even read the big letter at the top. Then at the end of the day, it is kind of on the driver to have to decide if whatever they're dealing with is sufficient to make them stop racing. And in the absence of other information or evidence, I think we have to conclude Max figured he could get by, and the evidence is that he got by without incident. So
yeah, and the next press conference, the first question is going to be, how's the vision, Max? And he'll be speaking to the PR team right now, and they'll be briefing him on the answer, which is, it's fine. I can see perfectly fine. I may have had some issues, but at the time that I was past fit to drive. That's what he'll say. But yeah, I think it is kind of a big deal. And I doubt he's the only driver to have ever done that. I'd imagine drivers with issues that are borderline routinely don't want to give their seat up.
In motorbike racing, which I hear is a thing, Kyle certainly talks about it. They seem to be always riding. That's what they call it, isn't it? When you drive with not enough wheels.
No, I think it's drive leaning. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, they routinely ride with things broken on them that you'd say probably they wouldn't be past fit to do a Formula One race with. So I think there are different levels that people are willing to cope with. And like Matt said, I think the evidence is that he did complete the race fine. Yeah. He did make all of those corners and in that race didn't crash into anyone.
Yeah, I suppose the ultimate defense is I was fit to drive because I did. So yeah, there we go. Maybe that's why you didn't quite see where the DRS safety line was in Qatar later in the year. Or saw it too well. Yeah, nothing wrong with his vision then, was there, Brad? Brad doesn't want to say anything else.
Brad's had enough bad comments for 1 week.
And still, under every comment that I'm seeing on this article, there is still several people saying, yeah, but Hamilton didn't go to the apex. It's driving me mad, Brad. I'd never heard that before in F1. I'd never heard that the driver on the inside was obliged to hit the apex. And now that's all I've heard since then. There seems to be thousands of people now who genuinely believe the inside car is obligated to drive to the apex.
It's all about who is moving towards whom at a greater rate. Just check that out in any incident, and that will give you a big clue as to who was predominantly at fault. That's all I'm going to say. Who's moving towards whom quicker?
Isn't that a bit of a broad brush? I suppose that if you could apply it to recent things, is there any circumstance where that wouldn't hold up?
I'd have to think of specifics.
But what do you mean by that is if you imagine like a motorway lanes around the circuit?
Yeah, okay. You could put it like that in a kind of system that looks at lanes, a lane system, if you will. But in any incident, any multi-car incident, there are multiple cars in this situation too that are traveling in the same direction, largely forwards, hopefully, within the confines of the track. And at any point, whether it's on a straight or in a corner, if one of them moves towards the other one, and doesn't stop when they get there, then they're the one at fault. If both cars are moving towards each other, then in my book, it's the one moving towards the other one at a greater rate. And we then have to go into specifics to see if there were situations where that didn't apply.
Well, here you go. Everybody blames Lewis Hamilton for the crash with Alex Albon in, I think, was it 2020 in Interlagos, where Hamilton's up the inside and he remains pretty much in the inside, is all the way over to the apex. Albon comes from the outside of the track all the way to the apex, but everyone blamed Hamilton.
It's unfathomable to me that could be blamed on Hamilton for exactly the reason I just explained. Who was moving towards whom faster? One driver's minding their own business, existing. The other driver is sweeping across the track, and when they get to the second car, don't stop. They just keep coming and try and drive through them. And I think it was Mario Andretti who was quoted a long, long time ago saying, "I'm there, man."
I just like the fact that Lewis said it was his fault.
Oh God!
Post race. I mean, you know,
but that doesn't tell you anything. Like,
I understand your argument, but if Lewis is holding up his hand and saying, "Yeah, that one was my fault," then maybe that was more complicated than we're making it.
No, that is just, he is quite magnanimous in those things. And like, why fight your corner? The championship was already sewn up by then. He was a very happy Lewis Hamilton, and I think he does tend to go, "Oh, okay, whatever, my bad." But if we're gonna, I hate these arguments, because I suppose that's the ultimate argument from authority, is we're going, well, let's shut down everything we know about the racing rules, because after the race, Lewis Hamilton went, "Oh, yeah, my bad."
Yeah, exactly.
That's on me.
Exactly. It's just, you can't throw out the way we judge these incidents just because one driver mistakenly admitted fault. There are plenty of other times where Hamilton has said it wasn't his fault, yet something was still ruled against him. So, and you could point at any driver and say, sometimes their decision agreed with the stewards, sometimes it didn't. So you can't then take their word as the thing that judges the incident. Hamilton was just being overly fair in that one. And he, at the time, without the full information and without having me explain to him that it's about who moves towards whom at a greater rate, he thought it was his fault, but it wasn't. So
I think it's simpler. I think he had no intention of fighting for that corner, and found himself in a position where he was on the line that he knew Albon was going to take. And that's why he said it was his fault. Like, he didn't get out of it as soon as he intended to.
And look, this happens a lot with us analysing stuff. Like, for example, Lando Norris said, "Yeah, we had the fastest car. If I had just got a better start, we would have won." Was that in Spain? I think that was in Spain, where he basically said, "Yeah, if I'd got a better start, I definitely would have won. We had the best car." And so everyone said, "Yeah, of course they had the best car." Norris even said it. Why would Norris say he had the best car? Because that would go against him. And then by the time we got to the next race, Norris was going, "Well, they were pretty close. Maybe we might have had an edge, but I don't know." There people didn't turn around and then go, "Oh, you're right, Spanish." He's walked back his comments about definitely having had the fastest car and definitely would have won. So I think, drivers, especially in the heat of the moment, they say stuff, and equally the stewards' decisions as well. We get this as well, Brad. Well, the steward said such and such. And it only happens if the stewards happen to agree with you, then you use the stewards as an argument of authority. If they disagree, then the stewards' stuff means nothing.
Yeah, I'm trying, as time goes on, more and more to not point to the stewards as an authority, even though they should be the main authority on this. They seem to be some of the least consistent in the application of how these racing rules should be applied. We saw that just recently at Austria, where all of us, plain as day, were watching a race saying, well, that driver is clearly moving under braking, and that should be at least being warned against, if not penalised. And nothing happened. So you could point to after the race and say, well, the steward said that was fine. 2 weeks later, they're saying, yeah, we should have shown in the black and white flag. It was like, yeah, as anyone who was actually watching that race could have told you at the time. And your lack of decision there, or your incorrect decision to not penalise that or warn against it, then caused a secondary problem. But anyway, we can go into that later.
Yeah, and something to remember is that sometimes from a distance, there will be circumstances where it's easier. There will be circumstances where you don't have the information the stewards have, but we're not under the same pressure that stewards are under, because if they had made a race-deciding decision and it's wrong, they're having to answer for that. So it's a much more high-pressure situation. Obviously, also, the drivers are considering their PR. They're considering optics. Maybe Lewis Hamilton just doesn't want to be the unpopular baddie who wiped out Albon, because wasn't that going to be his first podium? as well.
Yep,
So you don't
it
want to be
was.
the villain of that piece. You just go, oh no, sorry, because everyone was rooting for that podium as well. I just think that what comes out of people's mouths, there's 100 different factors influencing it, and it isn't always, the God's honest truth.
Yeah, I agree. Specifically regarding Austria, I think it's fair to say that we don't know if these stewards would have evaluated that in time. Because if I look at when race decisions come up relative to when they happen, there's usually a lag of a couple of laps for things like that where there's no contact involved. And I think by the time they might have been getting around to trying to evaluate what was going on in that fight, we'd already had the actual contact between Lando and Max. And so that is what they looked at immediately. So it may not be entirely fair to ding them. Or
I appreciate your valiant defense of the officials in that situation, but I also think it was abysmal. You've got well over a minute, and all it takes is to go, I'm watching the action. Oh, that looked a bit dodgy. Okay, someone carry on watching the race. Just bring up that replay for me. Yeah, just back 10 seconds. Okay, watch that back. Yes. Yeah, absolutely moved under braking. Okay, black and white flag next time past
Just a
the
warning.
pits.
Yeah, just a warning.
That's it.
Nothing
Done.
drastic.
No race influencing decision there. Just a warning. Job done.
Yeah, but there's a whole queue. I mean, they were still announcing track limits decisions. And so it just
but there's
goes
a
into the
hierarchy.
hopper.
There's a hierarchy of priority. You've got the fight for the lead, which is on the TV, which everyone has just seen, which you can see is about to escalate. Like any of us could see that was about to escalate, and it did. And then you've got someone going slightly wide at turn 7. It's just common sense of which they demonstrate a massive lack quite often.
Again, you may have a valid point, and that might be a systemic thing that the stewards indeed do need to address. I would agree with you. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Wouldn't surprise me at all if, in fact, they should implement a system like that where priority battles and everything that's less important gets kicked to the back of the line. But they may not have it yet. I'm just operating on what I saw happening during that race is a reason why they might not have adjudicated that before it was pointless to adjudicate it because the contact had happened.
I'm with Brad. The moving under braking was, if you were judging that as moving under braking, and I still maintain that I sort of, by Max's defense a little bit, that he pointed to where he wanted to go and hit the brakes. I know you don't disagree. I know you disagree, but let's say that is moving under braking. And they've acknowledged it now. They must have known at the time that was moving under braking. I don't really see any need to delay that. There's not just one person, is there?
Well, no, but usually all of the stewards have to look at whatever incident they're looking at. So if they're catching up on track limits that have been kicked to them automatically while this is going on, the race director might even be saying, in fact, we're queuing up video for this, but it's going to take a couple of laps. There seemed to be a lag of a couple of laps in all the steward's decision, which I put down to having to actually look at the evidence, discuss it, and come to a conclusion. The later you are in the race, the further back you get, which is why, again, sometimes it's 2 hours before we know the actual outcome of the race.
Okay, I know like VAR has sort of ruined the Euros a little bit in football, the video thing where the ref can go and check it out. But if you look at a referee just in the normal course of the game, if there's a big lunge and maybe, they get the ball, it's a 50-50 challenge, but the ref doesn't like it, he doesn't have to go VAR or pull a red card out. He can just go out to that player, whistle, boop, boop, and then just make a calm down motion. And so in every karting track, they don't have to, have a massive inquiry just to put the calm down board up. They just lean over. They should just have a calm down flag. There we go. And just wave
They
that.
literally do. They literally do. That's what the black and white flag essentially means.
Well, that could be a warning for all sorts of infringements, though. That could be track limits as well.
Even better.
Yeah.
Even better. Calm down. Stop going wide. Stop hitting people. Stop moving under braking.
I think it should say calm down, though, because there's nothing more infuriating than being told to calm down, especially when you don't think it's your fault.
I am calm.
How dare you?
I just think it takes a while to rewind the footage. If there's a point where me sat on my phone on Sky Go has better facility than the stewards, then there's a serious problem because I could just click back 10 seconds and watch it back immediately. So there's
but you're not
problem.
dealing with 500 track limits violations and the 97 other things, speeding in the pit lane, all of these things, every one of them, believe it or not, no matter
We're going
how
in a
obvious
circle
it
here,
is.
Matt.
Yeah, I know we are going in a circle. But the stewards actually literally do have to look at them all and come to an actual conclusion, which is why they fall farther,
2 weeks
farther
later.
behind.
2 weeks later, apparently.
But you were right. There should be a way for them to be able to deal with stuff like that, where there's driving standards immediately involved more quickly and take the more standard bureaucratic stuff afterwards.
All I'm going to say is, before starting an international motor racing series, maybe this is a thing you should have in hand before you do the first race ever, not like 60, 70 years in the future, have a bit of a think about it and still not be there. I just think this is something I would have in place.
Yeah, there's also no limit to the amount of stewards they could have. Like, there's so much money in Formula One. You could just have like 3 separate stewarding teams, one that deals specifically with race to, combat, wheel to wheel, one that's track limits, and one could just be their spare in case one gets a bit busy.
Yeah, no, I mean, these are all great ideas, and I think the FIA should take on board the criticism that they are getting, but I'm just explaining the system as it currently exists.
Okay, but given that we're highlighting those problems and 2 weeks later they were able to look back and go, no, and by the way, fair play. I don't want to do that down. I don't want them to go, oh, well, next time then we won't say that we got it wrong. No, I do appreciate that they look at it and go, oh, we got that wrong. Thanks. All I'm doing is I'm using that as an example of when we're having these debates, you can't always go, this is a big tangent. You can't always go, well, the steward said this, or the driver said this, because you get to 2 weeks later and Norris changes his mind. The stewards change their mind. Everyone feels, differently once the swelling's gone down.
And the other thing is, I'm going to ask Brad about this. It also seemed to me that, especially looking at some of the onboards later, this is very much also a driver's meeting with the race director kind of topic.
I mean, maybe. I don't know whether that did happen.
Like, you just sit the driver down and say, nope, not going to have that. You're not allowed to do that.
Oh, I hope they did. I hope they did, because, that's, you listen to like a rugby referee at the beginning of the game. They tell them, or a boxing umpire, judge, boxing ref? No, ref. Yeah. They say what's expected. We don't want low blows. I don't want holding, etc. So yeah, hopefully the referees did do that to the F1 drivers, because they did seem a little bit less erratic once we got to the British Grand Prix. Okay, then. I think we can stay with Red Bull, Matt. We've got a couple of things to talk about, driver news and their updates. Where do you want to settle on that first?
Oh, I think in general, my own predilections aside, I think the driver news, Lawson testing the car.
Well, tell me, what happened? I've missed that. What's that?
Well, he had a scheduled filming day in the actual current Red Bull car. And I think he's also got a historic car test coming up. And it was after the British Grand Prix. And a lot of people were saying that if he did well enough, it might be a mid-season change at Red Bull, with Perez, I guess, looking for a seat at the beginning of next season.
Well, that would be good. You're right. There was a test, wasn't there, at Silverstone in the past week. And we're hearing that Lawson did, in my books, a really decent, solid job. Am I allowed to divulge the lap time that we discussed earlier on?
Why do we know it?
I don't know. I heard you guys saying it.
It was a rumor on the internet that
it's definitely true then.
I thought I saw a quote from Marco with a time deficit to Max's best time, but they're also famously not allowed to run actual race tires on these filming days. So,
yeah, that makes it essentially impossible to check, doesn't it? When we know there can be 10 seconds in fuel loads, there can be, say, 4 or 5 seconds in tire type. And I don't know how that relates to the filming tires, which may be way worse or maybe even slightly better in some circumstances because they're made to work in cold conditions without warm up. Who knows where that stands? But I think we heard 2 seconds off Verstappen and they were disappointed in that. Oh, 2/10. Sorry, not 2 tenths. 2 seconds, obviously. Yeah. 2/10 off Verstappen. I would have said that's pretty good if conditions were comparable, but who knows if they were. Maybe they're saying, well, yeah, it was 2/10 off, but actually it was a second and a half quicker on that day. So,
and by the way,
really difficult to judge.
This is just, from what they're saying. You'll excuse my skepticism because the last Red Bull test I heard about, Daniel Ricciardo would have been on pole at the previous Grand Prix. And obviously that's not sort of worked out.
And obviously these tests, although they're private, they're not, they cannot be completely private at somewhere like Silverstone because you have marshals, you have a bloomin' housing estate that's been built at Maggots and Beckett's with the Escapade fancy multi-million pound houses there. You've got the hotel where the bedrooms overlook the circuit. So anyone with a mobile phone and the stopwatch app can time cars going around and then give those times out. So if someone cares enough, I'm sure some people do, then you could get plenty of information from people who are at the track at the time. It's not completely closed off at a private test track.
It's so weird that they gave Perez a contract a few races ago, after which it has been like dire. I'm not hiding away from that, where points seems to be an achievement for somebody who in theory has the equal best car. In such a short amount of time, they're now talking about evaluate in the summer. So Perez must have thought, well, I'm all right. I've got a 2-year contract in my pocket.
Yeah, I mean, you can oftentimes see people when they get contracts like that, you sort of see their results relax a little bit. But I don't think this is that. But the larger issue to me is, why are we discussing Lawson going directly to Red Bull in the first place? That is utterly mad to me. You'd either take Yuki or you take Daniel again if you felt that way. There's no way you should be putting someone with 5 races into the senior team.
3?
I mean, I can answer from my point of view. I think Lawson demonstrated great potential when he was thrown in last year into the junior team. I think he was pretty much on top of Tsunoda, certainly given the relative lack of experience he had. I think we know Ricciardo's level. We know Tsunoda's level, but also the bigger point is that Red Bull don't feel particularly connected to Tsunoda nowadays. He is a bit more Honda than he is Red Bull. And so if they're going to put someone in that may well be in for the long term, they don't necessarily want to just change him again at the end of the season, then Lawson out of those 3 is the best bet. He's the best Red Bull backed long-term prospect there.
So my thing would be about Yuki, which is, and I'm a big Tsunoda fan, and I would definitely want Red Bull to promote him, kind of. But as a fan of any driver, do you really want to see them go up against Verstappen in the Red Bull? That's happened to me once already. I've ridden that journey as a Perez fan as well. But I do think that perhaps Ricciardo underperforming so much has undervalued Tsunoda's performance. So it really, Ricciardo came in as a known poor entity from McLaren. So he was doing, his baseline level was poor against Norris. So then they've brought him in and gone, well, he's also poor against Tsunoda. He didn't look as bad against Tsunoda as Norris. So maybe that means Tsunoda's not as good as Norris. It's that kind of driver maths. And so you go, well, all of Tsunoda's achievements have kind of been, softened by not having strong opposition to show it against. So that's another reason maybe he's not an option.
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning that the updates they brought along the way have actually not made the car better. They've actually made it worse. And so that can also, by limiting the ceiling of the car, you can start to get false positive results in terms of your driver performance.
Sorry, Brad, I thought you were trying to jump in. No. So there's disappointment with Tsunoda, but it does look like his destiny is elsewhere. So they could just be looking at that driver program and going, we don't want to promote either of them. Let's put Lawson on a test day and let's see if we can do something magical. But here's the pattern: is drivers going straight into the senior teams. So we've got Antonelli just going to walk straight in to the Mercedes seat instead of doing the customary time at Williams, which is the Bottas route, which is the, I nearly said Sargent, sorry, the Albon route. And so Leclerc did his time in a Ferrari customer team first. All the Red Bull guys came through Toro Rosso, Alpha Tauri, Visa Cash App. So I don't know, Lawson, I know he's done a few races, but Lawson straight in, Antonelli straight in. What's happening? What's this change of mindset?
Well, if I had to guess, with regards to Lawson, he has done a couple of races. He's certainly more than Behrman. But I think it's maybe Red Bull going, what if we took someone who was inexperienced and we put them in this car, but we absolutely just said, okay, you have 3 years to figure out how to drive the car. We expect you in 26 to be on it, rather than let them get used to a different car that has different limits, that's driven different ways, and then chuck them in and say you have six races, and if you're not performing, we're already looking for somebody else.
I think from my point of view, who could they possibly put in that would do a much worse job than Perez has been doing recently? Unless we just assume the car is terrible and Max is a god, which I don't think anyone is saying. I think they're saying maybe the car's peaky, a little bit tricky, but still clearly capable of running at the front. And Max doesn't have any, superpower in addition to being just a really good race driver, which theoretically everyone on the grid should be somewhere near to. I think the gap between Max and Perez in the last few races, in fact, it's not even just the last few, in the last portion of the season, has been so big. I think we'd be looking at like Sargent before we were saying someone who would do a worse job than Perez is. Not saying Perez is a terrible driver. I'm saying he's terrible at driving this Red Bull at the moment, and maybe other people on the grid would be able to do it better than him. Maybe Ricciardo, I would love to see Ricciardo in there, despite what we've said about his performance. I'd love just to see, is he, if he's exactly the same gap off as Perez, then fine. That's probably what I'd expect. I think Lawson would be closer. I don't think anyone's going to jump in and match Max.
It's so bad.
We're not asking that of Sergio. We're asking him to just not be out in Q1.
But it's so big and it's so wide. Yeah, be out in Q1, Q2, and then struggle to get into the points and, maybe pick up your driver of the day for getting 7th at various points. But it's so bad. I'm struggling to think of a top team pairing with that big a gap. So we thought it was a big gap with Hamilton and Bottas, didn't we? Whereas, Bottas might slip behind one other driver, from the other team, might slip behind Vettel, might not defend as well as we'd have wanted him to against Verstappen as a Hamilton fan. So, that we felt like was a big gap. But could he be slightly unlucky with how close that midfield is? So now that the pack has closed up, this is the closest the pack has been in years and years and years and years. So it could be a bit unlucky that kind of a natural gap of 3 or 4 tenths is looking massive.
Well, I'd say then in that case, he's just been lucky to have the benefit of a front-running car, despite being several tenths off his teammate, and he's gotten away with it for long enough. And now the field's closed up. He's not good enough to be in that seat whilst there's a close field. You can get away with having a slowish number 2 when the field's spread out, but you need to have 2 good drivers if you want to compete at the front when the field is close.
Man, I wish he'd either never taken that drive, had the sabbatical, and taken his year at Williams to just look great against either Sargent or Albon. And I think he'd have looked fine. I think he'd have looked the same as he's looked when he's at Force India in those days. The same driver that was hired by McLaren to go up against Jenson Button. Or that he just got sacked quicker when he had a couple of competitive starts to the season against Verstappen. Like it fell away, but there were points. He has won races at Red Bull. I don't know what on earth is going on now, but there was a point when he had enough stock that an Aston Martin might pick him up. Not specifically Aston Martin, but an Alpine drive might have been there for him. Door open still at Williams. It's not going to happen now. His reputation is it's in the dirt. And I suppose he's 34 or whatever. I'm sad, and I'm waiting for the book. I'm waiting for the biography, the tell-all. There's got to be something we're missing for it to be this dire.
I just think the ceiling of that car is farther than he can reach.
No, I think it's what I said. It's some kind of... There's a conspiracy, and I'll find it. So, Matt, go on.
No, I've said this before, but I just because of your final answer there, I'd say just look at all of the top drivers' junior careers and tell me if you compare them against Perez, just as an example, because Perez is the driver we're talking about, there is not a single thing in Perez's junior career that would say to me that driver is going to be competitive against the best drivers of all time, like you've got in a Max Verstappen, for example. You've got someone who I think just about won the subcategory of British Formula 3, which isn't like the top one. It's like kind of the national class, and then didn't win any championships on the way to Formula 1. And you're talking about, why is that guy? Why is he far off of Max Verstappen, who is like clearly ultra brilliant and super, super fast? Well, yeah, he's just not is not the same level of driver, and that's where the gap is. That's probably the amount of gap you'd expect there to be, looking at both of their career histories. I don't think there's any conspiracy. I think it's just he doesn't have a car that's quick enough to keep him near the front.
Speaking of junior categories, go and look up the British F4 start at Zandvoort, I think. Did you see that? About a third of the grid didn't get off the line, and then 2/3 of the grid came up and hit them. Thankfully, all the drivers okay.
Did you see why that happened? I watched that video a few times.
Yeah, I did. I think, so basically there's a red flag.
Okay, so what it looked like to me was the lights come on, the red lights come on, the lights go off for about half a second and then come back on again.
Oh, no.
So everyone who reacted to the lights going out, as they should, pulls away. Anyone who was a bit slow or was confused by them coming back on again stops, and then there's just a big crash. So that was a light signal issue there.
Oh, you've got to look that up. So, because no one was hurt, that is legitimately funny. But apparently it's been taken down, so you'll have to find somebody else who's reposted it. But Matt, let's get into the Red Bull updates, because they don't look unbeatable now. If anything, they might not be the best car, full stop. So what's been going on with their updates?
Well, here's the interesting thing, and I'm going to say possibly the most controversial thing that I've ever said. It's not that their updates aren't working, but they're at a point where their updates are bringing them hundreds, while their rivals are still bringing tenths, new tenths to the table. And you begin to wonder, is this a combination of sort of your natural diminishing returns in any regulation set? But also, don't forget, there are rules, there are testing rules, and Red Bull has had the most restricted testing over the past 3 seasons, 2 seasons certainly. And could this be that the FIA regulations are actually working like they're supposed to? Because it's starting to look like it might be.
Oh, so this is the fact that they've had less aero.
Yeah. Eventually that will bite. Eventually that becomes an advantage for your opponents, especially when you start to get more mature with your design. The other thing I think we see very much with the Red Bull is that they may have improved their absolute performance, but again, they're narrowing their setup window. So it's peakier and harder for them to find that spot where they have absolute performance. But they said, they said the updates they brought to Silverstone, they saw gains with. So yeah, the battle's going to rage all season long, I think.
So a few races ago, I think it might have been Spain, where everyone was saying, but by that point, the internet had decided McLaren had the fastest car at that point. I think it may be not quite as black and white as that, but I've been waiting for Red Bull to do what they've normally done over the last few years. And anytime there's been a hint of hope, they just open up the gap again and look incredible. But in Austria, they looked very vulnerable, especially though, that was interesting, especially in the main race, less so in the sprint race. So it looked like a very fast race car in the sprint race, and then did something and had that blistering qualifying pace, but it didn't emerge. They didn't stretch away in the race. And then also, in Silverstone, they again didn't really look like the best car. Brad.
So as Matt and I were swanning around the Cotswolds last week, we were discussing about this McLaren trait of coming on strong at the end of the races. And I think that's one of the things we've seen in over those Barcelona onwards rounds, where we were kind of all doing exactly what you just said, thinking, well, when we get to the real tracks, when we get to the Barcelonas, Red Bull are going to just show us a clean pair of heels and depress us all. And that hasn't happened. And I think largely it's been this McLaren trait of coming back strong, kind of being quite happy to sit behind Max a couple of seconds in the first few stints or a couple of stints, but with the knowledge that when the car's light and we're on the lower fuel towards the end of the race, we're going to come back at him. And I wonder, and this is a very slight tangent, it is on this same topic of car development ceilings. I wonder whether the Red Bull concept, which has been clearly a brilliant one in the earlier phases of this type of car and streets ahead of everyone else, I wonder whether now the other teams have developed their own concepts. Maybe their ceilings are slightly higher and Red Bull's reaching the limit of its own and are having to make the car more and more edgy in order to maintain that performance, which someone like Perez is then struggling with. And with maybe some of these other slightly different concepts that have taken longer to come to fruition are actually now potentially slightly better, whether it's Mercedes now they've got their act together or McLaren. I wouldn't say we've seen that conclusively yet, but maybe.
Yeah, why are they stronger at the end? So, you know what, and also I feel like this coming back at the end is overvalued by people. So the lead car is always going to be managing a little bit, and so, you know, I think in Spain and Britain, you know, you could overrate Verstappen chasing Hamilton's pace, and you could overrate Norris chasing down Verstappen in Spain and go, oh, Hamilton was just clinging on at Silverstone. Verstappen was just clinging on in Spain. But, you know, the thing I've been maintaining is, well, we can't really tell what the car at the front was doing. So if McLaren have had this magical second half pace, is it that, or is it just that where they find themselves in that second phase of the race, they're the ones chasing, so they look quicker?
No, I firmly believe that they are husbanding their resource throughout the race to be fastest in the final sector of the race. Now,
it doesn't work. It doesn't work then, does it?
Does it work? What if you put on the right tires at the right time? Maybe it does work. We don't
if the
always
driver
know
leading the race.
answer.
The driver leading the race doesn't crash into you. It works.
Oh yeah,
it was
no, there's that.
Austria.
You know, I mean, we've seen evidence that they've been significantly more than half a second faster for a period of 10 laps or more than the people leading the race. Now, have their strategists correctly calculated the maximum delta to leave to the front of the race? Have they got that slightly wrong? Sure, that could happen. But very clearly, it seems like to me, they're pointing their whole race towards the last stint and feeling confident, if everything goes their way, that they can catch and or make a pass for the win.
Okay, but I mean, we can list a few races where that hasn't worked, though, can't we? So, yeah, great tactic, but it didn't work in Britain or Austria or Spain or Canada or Monaco or Imola.
So I think at Silverstone, it may well have worked if, one, the weather hadn't been, you know, as unpredictable, and two, they'd put on the right tyres for the final stint. And I know we could argue about whether or not they would have won with the mediums, but I think the general consensus is that they probably would have done. And I think it would have worked at Austria, apart from the incident with Max. I think it would have worked at Barcelona, except for Norris being inconvenienced in that first stint and losing so much time behind Russell, wasn't it, who went ahead and kind of held that little pack back. So I think on paper, if the race had played out as it needed to, it would have worked. That maybe that isn't the right strategy, because you can't guarantee the race will play out like that. But I think for them, it is the fastest strategy. I think for their car, that is the thing to place your bets on. And the thing to change is get the first part of the race right, make the correct strategic calls, and then you're there. You know, you've got the race wins on a plate.
Yeah, well, I just want to go on and say, I think you might be right in that it is a harder to pull off strategy because you spend more of the race with more things possibly going wrong and keeping you from fulfilling it. But I think if you look at the McLaren absolute fastest full race distance in the absence of other cars, they clearly are calculating the quickest way for them. And that very clearly means putting a lot of emphasis on that final stint. Whether or not other events get in their way, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Oh, I've got 1 point to back you up and one to argue. I think Mercedes might have taken this approach in 2021 because they were behind a lot of the races that they won. If you look at the laps led stats in 2021, it's mad. So Verstappen led something like 1 billion laps, and Lewis Hamilton did win quite a few very late in the race. So, you know, that's a tactic that has existed before. But I will say with all these coulda, woulda, shouldas, we seem to forget that Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, in all these races, they all had little things that went against them as well. And I just don't understand why all the McLaren things are forgiven and, yeah, they would have won, but nothing that went against the other teams, you know, is factored in.
I think for me, the answer to that is just pace. Like when you see the pace of the McLaren against the Red Bull, which is who's the incumbent, and that's the car we're kind of taking aim at, it seems like particularly the Norris McLaren has been able to keep up with the Red Bull in a way that the Mercedes, Silverstone aside, haven't been able to.
Yeah.
And although he will quite often drop away slightly in the first stint, when you listen to the radio calls, there's never a doubt in his mind that he's actually fighting for the win. So there's very much a measured and deliberate drop back in that first phase, or certainly a managed fall away in the first stint or two. And so it's the pace. The Mercedes in my view, the Mercedes have been up there so far in the exceptional circumstances. So Austria, obviously, they inherited the win. Silverstone, they were quick in pretty specific circumstances with a bit of magic sprinkled in from Hamilton. If you just took the Russell race, even before his water failure, I don't think he was the one that was going to feature outside of, first stint. It was almost the other way around.
My small
with the
point
Mercedes.
with the Mercedes is that pace has been disguised by Hamilton having some shocking Saturdays. This is my theory. But look, Matt, it's really difficult to pick this apart on looking at the first stint, because if you say it's just pace, well, the average fastest lap on the British Grand Prix, Hamilton had the lowest fastest average race lap, didn't he? So he was fastest because he won. But the first stint people are managing, the last stint people are managing. It's really hard to just look at a 10-lap chunk and go, well, McLaren must be faster because of this.
Well, okay, I'm glad you mentioned a 10-lap chunk. So the counterpoint to that is that you're right. Because he won the race, he had the lowest average lap time over the entire race distance. But throughout different phases of the race, different cars will be fastest. I think the problem for Lando mainly was tire call. But if we take, for example, would you agree that Max on his new tires was pushing about as hard as he could to try and catch? Is that a reasonable statement? Max wasn't managing in the last 10 laps of the British Grand Prix.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And was Piastri?
Yeah, but no. Max was on harder tires, obviously.
Max was on the hard tire. Piastri was on the medium tire, but they were both new tires. And the fact of the matter is Piastri was a second faster than Max, which is not something we'd really ever expect to say. Over those 10 laps, Piastri was a second faster than Max. Over those 10 laps, not over the whole race, because obviously he lost a lot of time with bad pit calls earlier. So
less than a tenth a lap.
But I'm saying the fact that Piastri on the medium tire can drive faster than Max for 10 laps at the end of the race suggests that McLaren really are aiming at this phase, and they think that's where their car has the best balance, the best tire usage, and the biggest advantage.
Matt, can I just clarify, just for my own understanding? Sure. Piastri you're saying he was 1 second quicker over 10 laps. So like Spanner says, like 1/10 of a second per lap. He didn't close in 10 seconds. Okay.
No. It was 1.054 seconds. I did the math.
Can I point out one thing that's been bugging me about the Silverstone Grand Prix, which is let's say what Hamilton was on.
It was brilliant.
Yeah, it was really good. But Norris was on scrub set. It wasn't like ones that have been off the Simpsons tire fire. They didn't go to Springfield and grab it from the tire fire. It was a scrub set. But still, Norris's went off 10 laps before the end. They started going off a cliff. And Hamilton's lap times, if you look at it, they are solid, consistent until the very last lap. And he says he was feeling some wear on the last lap. So in soft tyre performance and wear, Mercedes were significantly better than McLaren in that race, right? And in that race, the weather came about at exactly the point where having a brilliant tyre wear advantage would have been advantageous. Both of the stints got cut short and they went on to inters and then had to come off inters, both at times where Hamilton, you could argue, was in the better position with tyre wear. Why isn't that under consideration when we talk about performance and coulda, woulda, shouldas?
I might be massively off the mark here, but you could also say that the fact that the Mercedes could preserve softer tyres for longer meant that it could have a nice soft tyre in changeable conditions when you want to have good soft tyre life, if that makes sense. You want to have a softer compound when it's slightly dodgy.
It cut the stint. It cut the stint short, is my argument.
That's fair enough. Yeah. And I was watching the rain come in and thinking, oh, that's actually a bit of a shame because that might really play against us. And I'm counting me.
Hamilton. And the crossover the other way, Hamilton was killing on those worn inters, and that's completely predictable. That is Hamilton territory. And then obviously then it comes to the crossover point, and you go, well, we won't see that advantage play out. So that happened twice in the race.
I think there's a difference between arguing a hypothetical, which is what we're doing when we're talking about McLaren lap times and stuff like that, versus arguing a reality. Yeah, there's no one's going to argue Hamilton wasn't significantly better on that soft tire. I mean, I think Norris afterwards said that the soft tire wasn't a great tire for them. And I think you saw very clearly in the cool down room afterwards, everyone thought the medium tire overall was the best race tire. And which is why Hamilton was like, oh, you didn't go on the medium? I mean, yeah, he was sticking the needle in, but genuinely, if Mercedes had a medium tire, I think they would have put it on for Hamilton because it was quicker over that much of a distance.
Okay, but then you could say, well, if Mercedes had just done their weekend plan differently and had a medium tire to pick from, like that's no different a mistake, is it? From then
It's
McLaren
not
not selecting it.
See, that's not a mistake. This is the. Oh, I feel like I'm making my point so badly here, so I apologize.
I agree.
The fact that McLaren had that medium tire for the last stint, and Mercedes didn't, suggests that Mercedes was looking to extract optimum time from that medium tire at a different phase of the race than McLaren was. Maybe that makes sense.
Okay, so I think that Mercedes are back. I think Mercedes are genuinely back. And here's the quote from the F1 homepage. Wolff believes Mercedes are now clearly back and pinpoints moment that led to the breakthrough. What do you think, Brad?
The question is then...
The question is...
Since Mercedes, well, the Hamilton Mercedes is always really good at the Hungaroring, even when their car super sucks, he's still in the fight. How much is he going to win by next weekend?
Over under. What's the over under? Could he win by 5 seconds? So actually the question is, overall, has Lewis Hamilton made a mistake leaving Mercedes now that we seem to have seen James Allison back with kind of his second bite at the cherry? And it does seem that their latest breakthrough is suspension based. So there's a weird little bump on the top of the Ferrari nose, and Matt will give us a more detailed explanation, but it seems to me that it's been rooted in the suspension. And so they've found a suspension issue and a solution that doesn't fit into their concept, hence you've got a bodged little lump on the top of the Mercedes. But what if everything they've been doing all along with the aero has been kind of, pretty decent? So you've had James Allison come back in, come up with a decent aero concept, driving it forward, good upgrades, and then this has been the thing that has kind of unlocked it. If that's true, will Hamilton be looking at that going, oh my God, and looking across to the red garage and going, oh dear, what have I done? I
personally think all the kind of murmurings that have come out of Brackley, all the interviews you've seen with Allison and Wolff and the members of that team that are in front of the media, there's been this attitude switch where it really feels like there was, you never think there's going to be a magic bullet. It's normally just long, hard work and iteration over a long period of time to get back to the front. But it does kind of feel like they found a thing, and it's like, we had a one where we should have had a -1 or whatever. And it's
exactly
been that kind of switch. And now suddenly, it doesn't mean that they instantly are back on the pace the moment they find it, because they have to figure out a way to incorporate whatever the thing was into their current concept and make it work. But it feels like suddenly that process gets massively, what's the right word? Put into fast
unlocked.
Forward.
We should have carried the one. Why didn't we carry the one? It was ride height all along. So so before Matt gives us the tech explanation, I think they are back. I think if they're back, and the thing is, it's too late for this season, isn't it? Verstappen's got such a big head start. But so this is all about 2025. So when he made that decision, Mercedes was so lost, they were nowhere. And then Ferrari start the season so strong, you kind of go, oh, yeah, maybe there's going to be a crossover. If anybody's going to catch Red Bull, it's going to be Ferrari. Hamilton's done it again. He's a genius. He's made the Mercedes leap again. Whereas now I'm going, no, I don't like it. So what's going on, Matt? Are Mercedes back, and what have they done?
Well, I mean, very clearly, you look at their results, they're back. But let's be clear, back doesn't mean winning all the races all the time. Doesn't even mean we're going to win the constructors or the drivers. Back means we're in competition for podium spots at most of the races. That's how I took it, reading the article.
And who isn't in contention for the podium spaces at the moment? I gave it away. Ferrari are not in contention at all.
Yeah, and so I can speak to that, actually. Their latest round of updates didn't work as planned. And
Ferrari.
So they've actually reverted to the Imola floor. And so that has cost them several tenths, plus the several tenths everybody whose updates did work have gained. So they are not convinced it's a terminal problem, but they're going to have to rework their solution before they find those same gains that their competitors have. As far as Mercedes goes, this is really fascinating. They put forward that bulge as a cooling solution, even though it got rid of a vent that you would normally think would feed the driver. And it's directly above the area where the heave part of the suspension, which controls the vertical displacement of the chassis, is located. So the wild speculation, because none of this is obviously going to be confirmed by Mercedes in the slightest, is that they've had a breakthrough with the heave element. And as Spanners mentioned, that suggests that they might finally be able to run the car successfully at a ride height that suddenly makes the entire rest of their car work the way they were hoping it would.
I mean, they've said for a couple of years, haven't they, that they saw much bigger downforce in the wind tunnel than they've been able to actually access because of the bouncing problems, and then having to adjust their ride as a consequence of that. And so it makes sense that if they are able to finally run the car at an attitude that lets the aero work, that it's going to then work. And that would also tie in with their kind of relief and happiness in front of the camera. So in terms of that being a cooling solution, I guess choosing to not cool or to remove cooling is still a solution.
Technically,
it's one of the solutions available. And has Hamilton made a mistake in response to that? I think all the front running teams are going to be close enough that we could end up with a situation next year. I mean, look how quickly it's changed this year. Red Bull were running away with it in the first few rounds, and now suddenly we don't have a title fight, but we've got to fight for race wins every time. I think Ferrari could easily be back in that hunt, and the championship will be totally up in the air. If we start the season next year as it currently is now competitively, but with Ferrari having had the winter to sort out whatever their issue is, because it sounds like they've made a small misstep rather than having a fundamental issue. I think we could well have all those teams in with the fight, and then it'll be down to who does the best job, which tends to not be Ferrari, unfortunately, but you never know.
Let's see. I was going to just do the championship table quickly, just for some maths here. So Verstappen is on 255. Norris is on 171. So what's that? A gap of 84. All right. And then you've got Leclerc, who seems to have completely fallen away, is 105 behind Verstappen. Sainz is behind that, and then Piastri. So I'm really only counting the lead runners from the teams. And then you've got Russell on 111. So that's 145 points. I'm going to say Russell and Hamilton are out of the title fight. You've got to call it at that point, no matter how good they are. And in fact, all they can do now is make it less likely that Norris and Leclerc can fight for the title.
Yeah, they're all taking points off of each other. Always a fun thing to do is go add up everybody else who won a race and compare it to Verstappen's total. That's kind of a fun thing to do. That gives you sometimes a better sense of how competitive it is. But I think with regards to Lewis, he was making his choice looking at the end of his career and the things he wanted to be able to do after he retired. So I think if you're asking me, is he giving away a chance to maybe win a championship next year? Maybe. But in the larger picture, no, he's made the correct decision because he has bigger plans than just F1, and they're good ones. So I want to see them succeed.
There's actually no guarantee that Hamilton would have got the 2025 drive anyway, as that was only an option. So given that I still think it's on for Verstappen to Mercedes, I still think that is a conversation that's still happening. That could have been happening even if Hamilton had not signed for Ferrari. So, potentially they could look at Verstappen, who, by the way, is still only 25. They could go, we've got the chance to sign Verstappen. Hamilton's on an option. Verstappen-Russell seems like the better combination over the next 5 years. And that's actually hard to argue with, even as the most bog-eyed Lewis Hamilton fan. So, yeah, Hamilton might have seen that as Mercedes actually not being an option and being vulnerable, given that they wouldn't commit to a longer contract. Right, got time for one more news story here. So I'm thinking, do I pick a fight with Tomo about Piastri being P4 in his rankings, or do we talk about Newey? Let's go with Tomo. So Tomo F1, friend of the show, had put out his rankings of the drivers so far this season. And the one that baffled me and got the most feedback is he rated Piastri as P4. Now, I think that is a strong shout. So his rankings is Verstappen, Hülkenberg, Norris, then Piastri, Leclerc, Sainz, Russell, Hamilton. And actually, I don't have a problem with Hamilton and Russell being down there because Russell's ultimate pace hasn't been that impressive, and Hamilton's been way too inconsistent to be considered. But Piastri up there, P4, just behind Lando Norris. In my head, I would have put him much, much further away from Norris. But there is now a strong drumbeat of people saying, well, there's the coulda, woulda, shouldas, and basically saying, well, Piastri's been robbed of 3 race wins and is actually doing really well this season.
I think Piastri's had some bad luck. I've also seen Piastri be significantly off Norris in terms of pace, qualifying and race pace. So I think if Piastri was the lead driver in that McLaren this year, we wouldn't remotely be considering it as, the fastest car or close to the Red Bull. I think he would obviously have better finishes if he was the lead McLaren, but I don't see that. I've got no confidence in Piastri taking the fight to Max this year, apart from on peaky occasional races when it really suits him. Norris is clearly the one on form in that team. So I'd put Piastri a few places further back than that. I agree with you on Russell and Hamilton being kind of far down. The weakness of one is the strength of the other, and vice versa. Hamilton's been terrible in qualifying, really, compared to, well, not terrible, that's unfair. He's been slower than Russell, generally very close, but the wrong side of Russell. Yeah. And unless we're considering Russell a generational great, which I don't think we are yet, I think he's just very, very good. You can't then give Hamilton
he's been a poor
finishing behind him to 10-2 or whatever it is. But in the race, it's the other way around, basically, isn't it? So both of them have weak points. Norris and Verstappen, I think Hulkenberg's fair, although I never pay attention to him, really.
Well, when it comes to punching above his weight, Hulkenberg is definitely punching above his weight. He's definitely the most underrated driver this season, as I tweeted earlier in the week. But obviously, he's not going to feature in these conversations as heavily. And look, that's quite an attention-grabbing thing to put Hulkenberg P2. But, if you actually look at his performances, especially compared to his teammate, there's definitely an argument for us to look at Hulkenberg and go, come on, there's something pretty special happening there. So, but with the Piastri one, I think, Matt, if you put Piastri on a fresh set of boots or on a Saturday and say go, there's nothing wrong with him at all. But we can almost predict track by track where he's going to be strong and where he's not going to be strong.
Yeah, and this just gets back to the level of experience and knowledge you really need to extract the full amount of potential from a car like the McLaren. You have to be incredibly good with the tires. And I think the positive thing, if you're talking about Piastri, is it does seem that there is year-over-year improvement in that, even if it's not yet reflected in the points he gains during the race. But it is clear, generally during qualifying, that he's just about as fast as Norris. It's pretty clear at the start of his stint he can keep up with them. But again, Norris just has that. He's just better with the tire. He's just slightly better at everything. And over 52, 54 laps at whatever track, or 71 if you're at Brazil, those differences really add up. And he's not fully baked yet. That's what I would say.
So there are people that are gifting Piastri the win on Sunday at Silverstone. No, don't shoot the messenger. There's a lot of Twitter going, if he hadn't have had that bad stop instead of the double stack going round again, he would have been in contention for the win. Because look at his pace on the final stint. There was qualifying at Austria where he went over the line, but people think that the rules should have been different. Therefore, they're granting him, a success there. And I think he lost another pole lap or earlier in the season as well. There has been this strong move in social media of just, this sort of revisionist history with races. Well, if this one thing had been different, they would have got that result. But those kind of lucky situations or unlucky situations, they do tend to even out over the course of a career. Unless you're Bruno Senna, you will get the rub of the green sometimes and not at other times. So you've got to look at the aggregate of those results and go, at some point, if it was just bad luck, Piastri would be showing a little bit more compared to Norris and picking up those results a little bit more, unless you're saying, he has truly, broken a mirror in the bowels of Hades.
No, I don't think it's that. I just, my personal sense of Piastri is he's not yet fully formed. I think he's being competitive with Norris, where you'd expect someone of his age and experience to be. And where he falls away, that's also what you'd expect. Year over year improvement, we'll see where he winds up because it's still, I think, an open question. But yeah, he's been doing a pretty good job compared to most of the people of his class that have entered the sport.
Brad, everybody should learn how to race from you. It's a premium service, I would argue, but I would argue you are a premium coach. So for people serious about learning to shave some lap time off and learn about racing in sim racing, karting, real life cars, you're available now full time as a coach. And it is going well, but do you have any spots for our listeners to hire you?
Yeah, thanks, Spanners. Hey, listeners. Yes, so as Spanners said, yeah, I'm an A-grade driver coach and have been for a number of years. And I've got a website called theracecoach.com, which you should all visit. And if you're interested in learning how to drive fast on a track in real life or on the sim or both, which a couple of my clients have been taking advantage of, which is brilliant when you do a day at Silverstone virtually and then get to go there in real life and put that into practice without wasting laps in real life, which is quite expensive, then do that. Go to theracecoach.com and send me an email if you like, and info@theracecoach.com, and let's get you sorted out. As soon as we finish this podcast today, I'm jumping back on the sim, which is right behind me if you're watching on YouTube, and I'm going to go do some laps at Road Atlanta because our team, the Get Faster team, which is basically my students, my clients, all coming together. We're going to do a race as a team there.
Oh, that's so good. And there's some really good merch there from your instructing school as well. I want a use more curb one.
Oh yeah. Use more curb is kind of my unofficial driver coach team wear. I thought about getting some fancy tops and jackets which said driver coach, but I thought it was cooler just to wear my own merch. So head to any link at the bottom of any of my YouTube videos, and you'll find how to get all that cool merch.
Yeah, I need a session with you, Brad, as well. Because I'm being more aggressive wheel to wheel, so I'm being more aggressive in overtakes and like really capitalizing and making those moves happen and not getting bullied off. And also, I've been more aggressive on turning, trying to rotate more at the slowest part of the corner. So I need a fact check from you as well.
I'd love to kind of keep tabs on where you are, Spanners, because the listeners may not know, but when I first met you, you were kind of just an average amateur in terms of driving, but you were interested in getting better.
A stag do winner, yeah.
Stag do go-kart race winner. But I think, I can't really claim full credit for this because you've done a lot of sim racing and
no, it's mostly down to you. It is mostly down to you.
But you've genuinely improved to the point where you're now a threat to people who are much more experienced than you, both on the sim, but also in karting. You did very, very well at the go-kart thing at the Missed Apex Live event.
I beat my teenage son. That's the most important thing. That was the only thing
I beat everyone.
Yes, you were very good at go-karts, Brad. Go and check Brad out. We'll make sure we get a link in those show notes below. Matt, people can still follow you at MattPT55 on Twitter.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. And my wife, if you are a Barnes & Noble member, is having a pre-sale event. I'll drop a link as well in the notes for anyone who's interested.
Okay, so this is because your wife has written a romantic novel around Formula One. If we don't get the first interview, I'm going to be so mad.
Just WhatsApp me and set it up. She's not done any yet, but they're going to start recording them for a later release soon.
Mad was wrong. I would have been bitterly crushed, disappointed, and it would have been the greatest betrayal the world has ever seen.
We'll set it up as soon as we get back then.
And follow me, of course, at Spanners Ready. We'll have some midweek content for you, but also we will join you for the Hungarian Grand Prix. I think I'm going to be at the London E-Prix as well. So if you're milling around there, send me a message and say hello. Oh, Brad, you're going.
Me too.
We're going to be in the same. I've sort of stalked you a little bit because you said you were going to be there on the Saturday. So we're going on the Saturday now.
I think we're in like roughly the same bit of the grandstands as well, looking at the picture. So I was there last year for the London E-Prix, a bit of a Formula E tangent, but it's brilliant. If you haven't got anything on next Saturday, check out the tickets. They're really affordable at the moment. It's a brilliant event, indoors, and great for kids. That's one thing I noticed last year. Loads of families bringing their children because there's no fumes. It's not too noisy and you're extremely close to the action. And right behind the grandstands is a huge indoor fan area and a live concert. I watched, was it Ella Air singing last year? It was great. So go do it.
Me and the lad, 75 quid for the two of us to be there for all of Saturday, which seems like pretty good value. Make sure you follow me as well at Spanners Ready. Yep, next weekend, live again, I think 8 p.m. for the Hungarian Grand Prix race review. But wherever we see you next, work hard, be kind, and use more curb. You've been listening to Missed Apex Podcast.